So we move on to the next section in the Delete 3 Schools tutorials for React, and then we're gonna take a look at components and components. This series of videos will hit a bump in a little bit as components and files will follow components and components. Components and components are fine, and that's basically a class inside of a class, and we'll get through that fairly quick. You can see that we're going to have a class called car that's going to be inside another class called garage, and they'll display and they'll play nicely. The next section, though, it's components and files, and if we were working on a PC, a Mac, or Linux, anything besides the Chromebook, we might be able to run the software that we need to get this done. However, I'm still exploring a possibility of how to do it in CodePen. The problem that I have with CodePen, and I'll show you really quick, is that whenever we get to that point, rather than having two files, they even tell you here, notice that you now have three files in your project. You have an index, you have an index JavaScript, and then you have an app JavaScript. And while we are able to create and hold three files in CodePen.io while not paying any money, it's becoming kind of troublesome seeing how we're going to be able to connect those files since the commands that we use to load the React libraries don't necessarily work the same way. I'll keep you posted on what happens with that. In the meantime, though, we can definitely do components with components, or components in components. And once again, we can refer to components inside of other components. So a car gets created, gets declared in the program. It can be then called from another component, in this case, garage. I'll tell it to run the example, and this is what we expect to see. Who lives in my garage? And somebody will say, I am a car. The garage component will say the first part, and inside of that same thing, the car will come in. Notice how garage comes first, car is second, but when we declare it, the car gets declared first, and then we'll put the car inside the garage. Let me load up CodePen. It's over here hiding in the back. I'm going to create a new pen. Clicking on the pen. I'm going to give myself a little more space in JavaScript. For sure, here in HTML, I'll do the bang, the exclamation point, plus tab. It'll give me all the initial HTML. Apparently, we found that if we delete the doc type, then it works better. And we'll skip the title, we don't need one. And then inside of body, this particular exercise will call on, we have the h2 and the other h2, but the index tells us that we're going to have a div with an ID of root. Pretty much the same thing we've had all this time. So let's write that part of it without closing the files, please. Thank you. Here's the pen. So let's do that. It's going to be a division with, we said, the ID of root. We can then close the division /div, and we'll go to the JS, the JavaScript. I'll give myself more room in JavaScript. This might be, yeah, just about as long, maybe a little bit longer. I'll click on settings, and my JavaScript settings, my preprocessor should be Babel. Then let's load up React. And also React DOM. Save and close. And React and React DOM have been loaded. Give myself a little bit larger letters, just a little bit. Then in my JavaScript, we're going to declare that class that's called car that extends braces, go to render, and void, that's parentheses, close parentheses, open up another brace. I closed it, I should have opened it, there you go, go to the next line, and here tell it to return a header to page 2 that will say I am a car. We'll finish this with a semicolon at the end. We'll go on to the next line, the bracket closes, another bracket closes, and we can move on to the next line. Here we declare a second class. I'll give myself one more space here and say that we have another class, and this one is going to be called garage. Remember that classes need to be capitalized, and this extends the React component, which should be capitalized, component, with a bracket, brace, next space, and that is going to render in void, get another brace, to return yet another, actually not a bracket here, we're going to use parentheses, go on to the next one. So since we're giving multiple lines here, we're going to set all this, I should spell this correctly, return. Inside of the parentheses, have our return. Actually, there's the return already. I have the parentheses, and then to put this all together, we'll put them inside a division and get the car first. Get a angle bracket, car, which is capital C, space, and slash, close the bracket. Actually, before I have this, I should be telling it inside of the division, right after the division actually, that we want this big announcement that in header 1 says who lives in my garage. Question mark. We'll close it with an H1. Then we have the car, which will answer the question. And then to wrap it all up, or at least those two lines, we'll close the division. In order to display all this, at the very bottom, we'll invoke the React DOM dot render. Open up parentheses and bracket garage, space, slash, close the bracket. Give me a comma and then use document dot get element by ID. Open up parentheses, and we've been playing with root. Root should be inside of a single quote. And then if everything is correct, the semicolon stops and we have the answer to the question. The question being, who lives in my garage? I am a car. I can make it say anything else because it's all text. And if you don't want to say who lives in my garage, or rather I am a car, well, let's go to the first class car, that says I am a car. You can say the car lives here. And that should complete at least this part. I'm going to call this elements. Is there elements within elements? Make sure it's saved. As far as you're concerned, you're the student. Make sure that you have the right URL and turn this in for a grade in eCampus. We'll see you in the next video, which might have different tools to use.